Can I help?
That out. I need to twist and pull.
It's not twisting. Can we just turn it off back there? You know what's cool about all this? You know what I was thinking of is, well, I thought two things. So before, years ago, when I did PowerPoint, I added all kinds of stuff. I didn't just do scripture. And so when you go up and you preach without notes, at least me, you forget things. And so I would skip things, and the PowerPoint person was back there going, "Okay, where's he at now?" And so the people sitting, you guys sitting out there would see the slides going, "Oh, no, no, that's not the one." That anyway, it wasn't that bad, but it was pretty, it was pretty bad. But you know what was great about um, this morning is, we've I appreciate Laura and Carol and Jacob too, because we had to do different things today with the tech and all that, and it's how flexible they were this morning, so they could lead us in worship. And I thought about those times I would mess up, and then we had a few hiccups here this evening or this morning. That was a hiccup this morning, and yet God still, I don't know if he cares about the tech or or how flexible we are, any of that stuff. I think he just looks at our hearts when we worship. And I know we did that today, and I some real human drama and tragedy and a real bitterness of life. But we're also going to see loyalty and love and faith. And most important, we're going to see God work in the lives of ordinary people and in the decisions and the choices that they make and have to live with. And God, in the midst of all that, we're going to see that He cares for and loves His people. But at the same time, He's working out His redemptive plan. So this is an exciting point. And we're going to spend a few weeks. So let's kick it off, verses 1 and 2. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem, Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi, and the names of their 2 sons were not Gilead. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. So those 2 verses set the stage for everything else we're going to see in Ruth, and especially this week as well as we look at chapter 1. So people back then, it's like some people today, living on the edge. You know, you miss a paycheck, you're going to pay the bill. You know, how are we going to put food on the table? Well, back then, if there was a famine, there was no food. And so food was scarce and hard to come by. And so I can see them sitting at the proverbial kitchen table trying to figure out how are we going to make it cheap? What should we do? Because These are all things that were beyond their control. Like they had no control over Elimelech's life. They had no control over the famine. And so they're making these decisions and they're making these choices and without any or feeling alone, without any help nearby. And you might be there right now yourselves in some way, shape, or form. And we're going to see that there really is an answer, because that's where Naomi found herself, alone by herself. But just like you and I, as time goes on, life goes on too. So look at verses 4 and 5 with me. So the two sons married Moabite women named Orpah, who went on to have a successful TV show. No, that's actually Oprah. The R is in a different place here. But anyway, the one named Orpah and the other Ruth. And they had lived there about 10 years as married, but then both Mahlon and Chilion also died. And Naomi was left without her two sons and her husband. So, no kids, nothing. The sons, they did something that the Lord forbid, marrying outside the faith. And you might say, well, they probably did. Hey, we're living in Moab. What are you going to do? So they married these two Moabite women, and the decisions they made didn't really work out for them. So here's Naomi, no immediate family, in a foreign land, didn't speak, well, maybe she spoke the language by then, but it was a foreign language, and she had two foreign daughters-in-law who lived with her. So who were also grieving the loss of their husbands. You can imagine that this would be a very bleak time in their lives. In fact, we're going to see here in a few moments that Naomi was at the end of her rope and not knowing what to do. So she makes a decision, verses 6 and 7. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. So one of the things you see here, interestingly, is that his faith was still intact because she gave God credit for his providing for his people in her home in Bethlehem. And so her faith is still alive. So she makes this decision to go home. And in those days, extended families lived together. In fact, a lot of that happens today as well. But so the three of them are going to Judah. But there's a larger cultural norm at play here, which we're going to see in a minute. So listen to verses 8 and 10. Then Naomi said to her daughters, so she has second thoughts as they're heading back home. And she says to her daughters-in-law, go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Then she kissed them goodbye. They wept aloud and said to her, we're going back with you to your people. So here's this emotional scene where they're crying and everything. And then in verses 11 through 15, Naomi continues on. She's doesn't want them to come back with her for their sake, because she prayed for them that the Lord would find husbands for them. So Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons and who could become your husbands? Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait around until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it's more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people, and her gods. Go back with her." Again, another emotional scene, but that's a weird conversation for us today, right? So they're going, that's the cultural norm. So it's called levirate marriage. So when a man died, his brother was obligated to marry his brother's widow, and the first son born in that union would be considered his dead brother's, who would carry on the name and the legacy and would work the land that they owned, and so on and so forth. So it's very, for us, weird. But that's what she's talking about. And it was normal. It goes all the way back to Genesis. We see it in Genesis as well. So Orpah makes the logical decision, right? No future for her in Judah. She goes back to her people, going back to worship the God that she left. But Ruth didn't do that. Ruth did something that really wouldn't be logical from a human perspective. So Ruth replied, starting in verse 18, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." And when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Ruth makes a decision, and whether she realizes it or not at this point, that's going to change her life forever. And the decision she makes is going to impact generations of people. It's going to impact a nation, and it's going to impact the whole world, because she decided to go with her mother-in-law. And unlike Orpah, who made the logical choice, Ruth didn't make the logical choice based on human wisdom. Her decision is grounded in the faith, in her faith in Naomi's God. And so she chose to go with Naomi. And then here's what happens in verses 19 through 21. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, Can this be Naomi? And Naomi said, "Don't call me Naomi." She told them, "Call me Mara, because the Almighty, Shaddai, has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." Now, Naomi's name in Hebrew means delight. It means pleasant. And she's saying, hey, I'm not pleasant. I'm not delightful. I'm bitter. Mara means bitter. And she's bitter at the life that she has. And it's tough to tell if she's bitter about her circumstances or if she's bitter towards God and what he's done, because we see her faith still. She realizes that God is sovereign and that God really is in charge of everything. And so she's bitter. And it's a very emotional scene. I went away full. I was Naomi. I was pleasant. I was delightful. I loved life. And now I'm empty because of what God has done in my life. No husband, no grandsons to take the name, no grandchildren at all to carry on the heritage of the family, the legacy. And so she seems very depressed and very bitter. She feels empty because of her circumstances. And she holds it up to God. She doesn't connect where she's at today because of decisions they made years ago. And all of us really are products of our past. And so was she. And she's blinded by her bitterness. Just like sometimes you and I are, we focus on the bad. We don't even see the blessings that we have, because the Bible, this passage, doesn't say anything about where Ruth is. You know, Ruth hears this. Oh, you came back empty. What am I, chopped liver? But no thought about Ruth, who is a blessing to her. And so this seems very hopeless right now from Naomi's perspective, because people were amazed at what she looked like. Is this Naomi? You know, not only had she aged, but she was depressed. And it showed, I'm sure. But it doesn't end on a hopeless note. Look at verse 22 with me. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. So this was a time of plenty, and they would be provided for. They could count on having food. And she was back with her clan and people around her, and she had a support system. So we're left in chapter 1 with this hope that Naomi has. This is really a great story, don't you think? I mean, it has everything, and we're just getting started. Wait till we get to the rest of it, because here's the great thing about it. It's about ordinary people living ordinary lives, making decisions based on what's in front of them, and then having to live with the results of what they've decided. It's just like you and me, the way we make decisions as well. And the decisions we make also impacts other people and maybe generations in our families and with our friends. Through it all, though, through the tragedies, through the decisions, good, bad, or indifferent, what we also see is that God is at work. And of course, Naomi recognized that in his sovereignty, he has afflicted me. So it must be God, since he's in charge. But do you notice, God doesn't just pop in here and there even though it might look like that. But we see here, and we'll see through the rest of Ruth, that he is continually working in the background. Naomi didn't see it, and sometimes we don't see it either, that God is at work in our lives. Involved in the whole time, in our messes, in our good times, in everything, God is always there, even though we may not see him or even feel him. And he's there. So based on what we've seen today, I've got 3 takeaways for you. Here's the first one. The grass is not greener in Moab. Elimelech and Naomi found that out. They made what seemed to them very logical decisions about what to do because of the famine. But human logic, while it's helpful, because after all, God gave it to us, if we can think critically, there's more to life than what you and I can see. And there's more to decision making than common sense. They forgot that. There's no evidence that they consulted the Lord one way or the other. Good decision, bad decision, they just made them. They were like the time of the judges. There was no king. In this case, we don't see God in their decisions, and they did what was right in their own eyes. Now, the logical thing to do is to use our brains, right? God gave us our brains. I don't know about you, but that's usually the first place I go, my brain. So that tells you the trouble I'm in. And many times, the decisions we make are based on how we experience things before, and the results of those decisions, and what came out of that. And that kind of drives how we think about where we're at today. But when we're making decisions, no wonder that wasn't working. Kidding, I have no idea. But when we make decisions, we have to look deeper than our circumstances. And we have to look past the results of what's happened to us as a result of the decisions we make, because the Lord is bigger than our circumstances. And he's bigger than our brains. And we need his wisdom. So how we react to things that come our way in life, whether we see him working or not, determines, it's kind of an infrastructure of how we begin to look at the future. So if we leave God out of it now, chances are we will leave him out of it when we need him. And we all have our own Moabs, right? I've got mine, you've got yours. You know, we look for our own solutions. We trust our own judgment. We don't necessarily go to God to get his. You know, do I stay? Do I go? What do I do? Sometimes we're tempted to compromise in ways that we shouldn't. And then we do the wrong thing, and our integrity is compromised, and our integrity is priceless. I used to tell my son, I don't need to anymore, but I said there are 2 things in life that no one can take away from you, but you can give it away or you can sell it. One is your soul, the other is your integrity. And when you lose either one of those, you're lost. So we do the wrong things. God always calls us to do the right thing. And so we have to go to him to decide what we're going to do. Here's another Moab. We run from our circumstances. We stick our head in the sand and we don't deal with whatever it is that we need to deal with because we don't trust God enough to provide whatever the issues might be. We don't trust him for his protection. Here's the second takeaway. God does not limit our freedom of activity. Now, that's a little theological nugget from this chapter, from Ruth. Sometimes, you and I might blame God for our circumstances that resulted from decisions and choices that we made. Even though he's sovereign, even though he's in complete control, he allows us to make decisions and he allows us to act on them. Many of the troubles we face, many of the feelings we have are a result of past decisions that we've made that haven't worked out well for us. We all do those things. And we make decisions and choices. And even though God's in charge and he's going to accomplish his will regardless, we still have to suffer the consequences sometimes of our own decision. And sometimes, we blame others, their fault. Or we look in the past. It's my parents' fault. They did this. But the Bible teaches personal responsibility. And we can't keep doing this. The first place we should look is the mirror and ask ourselves, what part do I have in the consequences that I'm facing that now? But even then, God is at work. Here's the third takeaway. When you're at the end of your rope, remember God is on the other end. Probably many of us in this room have been in a place in life where we feel like we're at the end of our rope. And maybe we are. And we don't know where to turn. We don't know what to do, where to go. Maybe you've lost someone you love dearly, whether it's through death or divorce or whatever the case might be. And you're left alone. Could be you get the long face from the doctor and you get the diagnosis that causes you great fear. Now we're talking survival. Maybe it's the loss of a job. I don't know about you, but I've experienced that. And what's even worse is if you leave one job, good job, you go to another one, better benefits, higher pay, got a place to get promoted to, and then you get laid off. That's a terrible place to be. Or your kids go south. They're not walking with the Lord. And you're asking yourself, what did I do wrong? How could I have done better? Ellen and I were there for a time too. Or we're overwhelmed by our circumstances and we're just stressed out to the max. And we're like deer in a headlight because we don't know, we're paralyzed. Even in our hopelessness, even in our bitterness, God is always there and at work, whether we know it or not. In Naomi's life, he was putting these pieces together. He was going to provide for her and Ruth, and at the same time accomplish his redemptive plan. Because God is big enough to do both. How you and I respond to to tragedies and suffering in life significantly impacts how we get through it and how we move on. And if we leave God out of that, we're not going to get very far. We're going to remain in our hopelessness and bitterness. So regardless of what the root of the circumstances are, bad choices, good choices, circumstances beyond our control, God is at work through all that. And we must maintain our faith in the Lord's love and care, just as he's showing to Naomi, even though she doesn't see it right now. You know, Romans 8:28 could be the theme verse for this Old Testament book. Because Paul starts out in Romans 8, in verse 26, about how the Holy Spirit knows our weaknesses, and that the Holy Spirit prays for us when we don't know how to pray, and that he's always interceding for us with God the Father, because he knows our mind and he knows the Father's mind, because he's God. And then he says in verse 28, and we know that in all things, God worked for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. See, we know those things. It's a sure thing that God is at work in our life to accomplish his purposes, to care for you, to love you, even when you don't see him at work. Let's pray. Lord, I just can't express how grateful I am to you for your grace in our lives, for your love, for your care, for the fact that you don't rest. Sometimes we may not even sense you're there with us. We're wondering, where did you go? And yet your word tells us you're always at work on our behalf. And that somehow, even though we can't see it, you're going to make sure things work out for the good. Yes, we